I think the last time we had that I was at a meeting in Box Hill, I did share something about my garden and talked about interplanting and succession planting. So this is a little bit of a continued exploration of the whole idea about growing more in our garden, being more productive, but it's coupled with also this concept of working less. You know, there's heaps of reasons why we want to work less. Maybe we want to go away on holiday. Maybe we want to, we're recovering from an illness. Perhaps we've got new grandchildren, all sorts of personal reasons why we want to try and do a little bit less in the garden. I have to confess that mostly I love to be in my garden. So that's, but it's what I do there that perhaps also needs to change. No two veggie gardens are the same. Everybody gardens from their background, their culture, their own personality, and also, you know, what people grow changes, doesn't it? If you look at someone else's garden, you've often got to say, well, what is that green veggie that's growing in your plot? I was born in the UK, so I have lots of memories of my grandfather's garden, which they lived next door to us as a child. And it was, you know, 11, 12 years after the war, but people were still digging up their, using their backyard dig for glory gardens. And he had just rows and rows and rows of potatoes and cabbages and carrots and onions. And I think pretty much there was 4 things in the garden. That was the diet of most Brits at that time. But grandfather had a great garden. My other grandfather had a tiny little garden, and he was just growing all sorts of things in just almost a cold frame. And so that's a visual memory that I have. And my own dad, he planted a little garden as well. It just seemed like, you know, in England, everybody had a garden. And I only have 2 memories of my father's garden. One were the marrows that grew up out of the compost. And in my childhood memory, they were huge, and I led sort of Zeppelin balloons, and we all know what that looks like. And the other thing is a disappointment, and perhaps, you know, some of us have disappointments in our lives as well, but he had a really lovely strawberry patch, and we would watch the strawberries form and the little green berries and coming from the white flowers, and just almost dribbling as we looked around this garden. But every single year we went away on holiday at the same time, because in the UK back then, the whole different factories or towns would go away on holiday for a 2-week period. And I think maybe this was to prevent overcrowding at the holiday resorts or something. I'm not sure why, but that 2 weeks was the 2 weeks when the strawberries ripened. And so my whole childhood, I never remember eating a strawberry. That's been remedied because my husband loves strawberries. And in my front garden now, I'm just going to ask him, how many strawberry plants did you put in? He put in 1,000 strawberries. So here's fingers crossed, you know, we don't go on holiday when they ripen. So
4 different ripening times.
Yeah, 4 different ripening times. There you go. So that's healing my strawberry memories for me. The other thing that I want to kind of emphasize is that things that I share are a reflection of my personality and my experience. Hopefully they're a little bit scientific as well, because I am the kind of personality that questions things. Is that a myth or is it a reality for me as a gardener? And I've had the chance to see people garden all over the world. I love being a member of Nunawading Community Gardens, because up there you have a walk around and you're just seeing what people grow all over the world. It's just a wonderful cacophony of vegetables and food cuisines and history, and no two plots are the same. Some of us are rows and super, you know, straight. One plant stays in one place and, you know, it's strictly controlled. And other garden plots are kind of a big mix up of plants growing in a kind of polyculture with lots of things mixing. And if you don't have eyes to see, you might miss what's growing in that plot. But that plot can be very, very productive, and the grower knows where things are. And yeah, so it's a very personal journey, your garden. So please don't take anything I say too seriously. Take it home and apply it, and bend it so it suits you. I think it's really important, if you want to grow more, is to grow something that you love to eat. So I'm very aware that we have hundreds of years of gardening experience amongst this group here. And what I like to eat actually changes from year to year. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I started growing soybeans for eating as edamame. If you raise your hand, does anyone else grow those? Anyone else growing the soybean crop? No one? Well, it's a great crop if you want to fill an area for an extended period of time. Who likes to eat them? Feedback. Judy loves them. Anyone? I can only see 4 screens here, so I'm hoping more people like to eat those. The other thing that I've noticed is that plants will do the work for you. So if you want to go away on holiday, for example, and you know when you're going, if it's going to be over that summertime, then it's much better to think about planting crops that are going to take care of your garden while you're away. And the two that jump to mind for me are potatoes and pumpkins. Potatoes, you can just walk away, leave them, they carry on growing, they die back, they stay in the soil, and they won't, well, unless it's very, very wet, which probably is unlikely over the summer, you can come back from your holiday, dig them up, and you've got a crop. And pumpkins are the same. I was talking to my neighbour about this up at Nunawading, and she was too busy to do a lot of gardening that year. And so she put pumpkins in, and they just covered our whole plot. There were very few weeds growing underneath, but what did come up underneath was a lot of lettuce plants. And so I was harvesting and watering for her, and under these pumpkins we were harvesting beautiful little lettuces. So yeah, so thinking about the plants, if you have other things to do, they will fill your garden. So I'm going to give you a little trip through my garden here. Some of you will have seen some of these pictures. These are taken over the last couple of weeks. I've just been, because it's still COVID and lockdown, I'm afraid all of my examples come from my garden, so please forgive me. But we live on a corner block, and as you can see, lots and lots of fences. So when you are trying to think about growing more on your plot, don't neglect both the inside fences and the outside fences. The picture on the left is something that was planned 30 years ago when we first bought the property and did a small extension. We realized that it was a very dark side of the house, and it faces east, and we weren't getting any morning sun in our little living space. And so we put up this hurricane fencing down that side of the house, which is, it makes us a bit unusual in our neighborhood because this neighborhood is all wooden palings. But on that fence line, we have got all these beautiful productive trees planted. So looking at that left-hand picture, standing, taking the photograph on my right, which you can't see, is a new plum tree. You've got a heavily pruned fig. After that, there's an almond tree. After that, there's a feijoa and a cherry guava and another feijoa, a peach tree, a nectarine tree, a lemon tree, and then right in the distance, and this is only 11 meters, or maybe a bit longer, maybe 14 meters, and then right at the end is a grapevine. So fences are a fantastic resource. And we use this side of the fence, and if you look against the house, you can see my solar meter there. There's also 2 more cherry guavas growing there as well. So that whole area is very heavily, very productive. The picture on the right is the northeast facing corner. It's like a wedge cut off that corner of our garden. And on this corner, I don't get to this corner to water or anything. So it really has to take care of itself, but it gets lots of runoff from the paving if we get any rain. And I beautify it in the spring. And these are sweet peas that are coming on now. The ones closest to us are the volunteers that just grew up from droppings. And then the others that are a little bit slower, they're ones that I planted myself a little bit later on. So it's beautiful in the spring, but then later on in the season, when at the very end of the season, I fill it up with beans, with Purple King, and they have beautiful purple flowers. They look fantastic. And I don't think people really know what to do with purple beans. So I don't get a lot of, no one comes and picks all my beans. I always have plenty. So that's my, those are my fences in that direction. This is the front of our house, and that's been beautified with that grapevine as well. And if you're talking about growing more, you can also think of it financially as well, rather than perhaps quantity. And although that grape isn't the most productive, it really is the most wonderful cooling vine that keeps, this is the north facing side of the house, and that vine shades that whole veranda so we can enjoy it all summer. And then the right-hand side is the other side of the north-facing fence. So we grow on both sides, and that's got a couple of apricots and mulberry. And then behind me in the photograph, we've got, what have we got there? A loquat and a feijoa. Yes, a loquat and a feijoa. And it's this under this, to the side of this fence where we're still getting the beds ready to finish transplanting all the strawberries. So this is a view of my little kitchen garden, and we use the fences here as well. The size of this garden is 4 meters by 4 meters. And I had a little revelation when I was preparing this talk, that 4 meters by 4 meters actually is mirrored by the chook yard, which is on the other side of this fence, which is also 4 meters by 4 meters. And I wanted to talk about this chook yard a little bit later, because in that chook yard, I was thinking, well, that's ridiculous. Why did I make such a big chook yard? surely it would have been better to have a 6 meter by 4 meter veggie patch. But that's where all of my food production magic happens. That's where I make my compost. That's where the chickens do weeding and scratching and work on everything that I use in my garden to create productivity. So yeah, I think it's important to think that creating a place where or thinking about soil productivity is just as important about thinking about the space where you plant your veggies. Let's just take a minute. Has anyone got any questions so far? This is, I hope you've not gone, you need a coffee? Are you okay, everyone?
Oh, all good.
Any questions?
You don't have much shading in your garden. Some of us have got a lot of trees and such from neighbours. How do you handle where you've got a lot of shading?
Well, if I bring it back to this picture here, those apricot trees are growing on the south side of the fence. And you can see a tree, the council have planted a prunus on the other side of that fence that has affected that garden quite considerably. But we still get enough late sun for those apricots to bear fruit. Now, it does not bear the same amount of fruit as it did when we first put it in, but it still gives us some of the most delicious apricots. My husband's talking in the background, and it's espaliered against the fence, so any sun that does hit it is really utilized by the plant. The area in front of that fence used to be very productive. Well, it used to get a lot more sun than it does because, like you, Dennis, we've lost sun. But my husband's just he's heard this story too many times. We've got strawberries now growing there, and they don't mind shade. They'll be quite happy. They're forest floor plants. So we have to manage shade too. We've also we've moved our garden around as things have changed. A very large paperbark growing on the eastern side of the garden. It's not about the shade with that, but it just sucks up every ounce of water. And so we did have a couple of trees growing there, but we've since dug those out and moved them, and we put our woodshed there because wood likes to be dry, and the paperbark's doing that. Perhaps one day the paperbark will go the way of all paperbarks, and then we can use that area for growing again. So just on to watering, because this can save you a lot of time, but you know, no two gardeners use the same watering system. And I'm just going to share this because it's really changed my watering life. I went down to the irrigation shop and I said, I've got a small garden, 4 meters by 4 meters. What is the best way to water it? And they just said, oh, you need this head on your sprinkler. And they sold me this little head. I don't know, it cost like $5 or something. I mean, it was so cheap. And that's the spray from that one little nozzle does the whole 4 meter thing. Now, admittedly, if the pressures, the tap's turned full on, it does go onto the concrete. So I do adjust the pressure a little bit. But my husband has at different times put in drip systems, but this is very cheap, very easy, and very specific. And I think because it comes from a more commercial, like farming shop, where they don't want to water anything other than the spot where they're growing things because water's expensive. And the other thing about this this system is I can put it on a timer. So if we go away for a few weeks and no one's living at home, it will switch on and water. And it will only water my little 4 meter plot. So, but I think we could talk for hours about watering systems, but it doesn't have the drip system clogging problem. It doesn't have lots of moving parts or plugs or bits that could break off. It's just very basic. And the other thing that I use, and it would be interesting to have a show of hands, I use my watering can because in my little 4-meter area, some plants need more water than other plants. So if I've just put seedlings in, I'm not going to water the whole 4-meter square. So I'll just go around with one can of water and water the seedlings. Having static fixed trellising systems, we use these fixed trellises basically because I think we might be lazy. We don't want to build them every year, and I love these. They're cheap, and it's reinforced Rio mesh, and it's got great sized holes, so everything from pumpkins to beans are quite happy growing up that mesh. And if I'm doing any rotation, this is my plot, by the way. This is the Nunawading Community Garden plot. If I'm doing any rotation, that fence is also a great place to grow tomatoes. You just tie the tomatoes up to the fence like you would tie them up to stakes. So while that picture's up, I will just say this is a bit of a spoiler for you all, but I do not dig my soil at all. I don't know how many other people are using that no dig system. So my general philosophy is try not to disturb the soil. So I just harvested, this is fennel. I just harvested a couple of weeks ago. I don't even dig up the leftover plants. I chop them off and I leave the roots in the ground. After about 2 or 3 weeks, with just a twist, the stalk comes out and all of the root systems are left undisturbed. And it's those roots, around all those roots is all your mitochondria and all of the good stuff that the next plants will need. So I won't disturb things if I can help it. So that's trellises. Well, where are we up to? Let's have a look.
Can I just ask what the 2 things in the back are? The plastic bags you've got there and what you've got growing in them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is my kitchen garden, and those are on that back fence line are 2. They're 2 small. How many? I think I've got 4 tiers. 4-tiered greenhouses.
Okay.
They are there in this picture, but they're not there now. I leave them there all winter because that's a north-facing fence. But what I wanted to say was I don't think that your productivity has to depend on having a greenhouse at all. They're quite a lot of work. So if we're talking about less work, I think a greenhouse perhaps doesn't fit in, because I'm always, every single day, even in the middle of winter, I have to think, oh no, it's a really sunny day. I better run out and roll up all the doors of the greenhouse. Because it's so small, it's very hard to control the temperatures. So the daytime temperatures, they're up at 35 degrees, killing everything in there. And it doesn't hold the heat very well overnight, but I do still like to use them. The wintertime they sit here, and then in the summertime, which I call springtime really, in the spring I move them, and at the moment they're on the eastern wall of the house, where they get morning sun, but after about 1 o'clock in the afternoon they're not getting the hot sun. So those are my 2 little greenhouses. Positioning for success. This little garden is 4 by 4 meters, and it's less than 4 meters from my back door. It also sits on my driveway, and everybody walks past this garden. So everyone sees what's growing. Everyone can pick and help themselves. Not very many people weed.
Funny about that.
What's wrong with weeding? That's what I want to know. But I walk past it all the time, and so I do a little bit of weeding every time if I see something happening, I'll grab my little weeding tool, which I'll show you in a minute. But it's very, very productive. This is, if we just look around on I can't point. Can you see if I use my pointer? Can you see that pointer?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a little bed of growing, those are spring onions coming on there. Just behind them is a patch of new parsley that's growing. Behind that, that's rocket that I've since pulled out, and I've seeded that as well. So if you see bare soil in this picture, it's not really bare, it's just seeded and coming on. And also my philosophy for the garden is never to leave the soil without a cover on it. So this little patch gets a couple of inches of compost once or twice a year. So that what you see there isn't actually soil, it's a compost mulch. And since I used to worry, do I have enough, materials in my soil for the plants to grow? Is there enough nitrogen and phosphorus and boron and all of these questions? I don't know if you worry about that, but I'm always thinking, is there enough? Well, there is enough, provided your soil is healthy. As long as the soil is healthy, the nutrients that are there will be available. And the plants, they don't need a lot. They just need a little. And the worm activity is, it's just amazing under that layer of compost. And I've been putting that 2 inches on for about, what do you think, Tom? 12 years? I've been using a compost mulch for 12 years. It disappears, 2 inches. My garden, if it hadn't been consumed by the organisms, it would be a foot higher, but it doesn't get any higher. That compost somehow vanishes into the soil. I guess the worms eat it or something. So I was speaking yesterday with a friend, and she's very clever. She's put her kitchen garden on all edges of her driveway. So she drives in and out, she walks in and out, she sees she sees that garden all the time. So if you want a productive kitchen garden, as close to your back door as possible. Or the other thing that I think works is put a little place where you'd like to sit. I know Heather sits out in the garden because I saw a picture of her having a cup of coffee looking at her chooks the other day. So find a way to get into your garden more often. Now, I can't see the time. Can you give me a time check, Tom? 11:10, right, better speed on. So that's a view from another direction. Tom pointed out that this is a really fortunate little plot, really, because we've got 2 sides that are fences, and we've got 2 hard landscape sides. One is the driveway, and the other is being paved that you can see just there. So weed incursion is not really a big problem. The weeds that I get are weeds that blow in. But this mulching system with compost, I bring hot compost in, and here is my composting area. There are very few weed seeds that come in from this compost. As I said from my childhood memories, I don't know, that gets up to like 70 degrees, and you'll still get a marrow growing out of that compost. Obviously they're very heat tolerant marrow seeds. But I've got 5 chooks. I have one of the problems with composting is getting enough material. And fortunately, I have a son who runs a gardening business. So they bring me a lot of lawn clippings. And often in those lawn clippings is leaf matter. And I bring all of my veggie waste and put it in here. And I've got weld mesh. You know, I was talking about that Rio weld mesh. I make that's about 1 meter wide. And if you go to Bunnings and you cut some shade cloth off of their big roll, it makes a tube that's just the right size to fit over those crates. And so if you look at this left-hand picture, this is the shade cloth. Not very well set up, this one, but anyway, that's the shade cloth. And then the weld mesh is supposed to be cable tied, but I think my son set this up. I don't think he put the cable ties in. And that's about a cubic meter of compost there that's going to be used at Nunawading Oct and here. And just back to my my comments that a productive garden is a garden where you cannot see the soil. You should have that soil covered at all times. Microorganisms in the soil cannot tolerate heat. And so if your soil temperatures raise much higher than our body temperature, then they start to die off. If that soil gets dry, they also start to die off. And the living, you know, the animal insect, are worms insects? I don't know what, Heather, are worms insects? Now, what are they called?
No.
Worms.
Worms are worms. Is there a classification for worms, or is it just worms? Worms. Worms disappear, don't they? If you've got them covered, like with a layer, they'll be there, very, very active. If you water, I've noticed that if there's an awful lot of rain and a thing gets too wet, the worms will come to the surface. Like, I don't think they like it. They can't. They try to escape that water. So yeah, putting a mulch layer on helps to maintain moisture. It helps to reduce heat, and it also breaks down and creates a place where the microorganisms are very happy and healthy, and that's what gives your soil the productivity. This is up at the Nunawading Community Gardens. I got permission from these gentlemen because I spotted them loading up barrow loads of grass clippings here. And you can just mulch straight onto your plot. Some people do that, like cut and drop. They'll just chop up the veggies and throw them down. And grass clippings there's a little bit of controversy, but they are okay as long as you don't put them down too thickly. The best thing to do with grass clippings is to let them dry out a little bit. When the grass clippings are looking a bit brown, then they are actually very well balanced in terms of carbon nitrogen. The green ones are a bit nitrogen heavy, and they'll go all kind of soggy and sloppy and break down into a gooey mess. But once they've dried out a bit, you can just sprinkle them on just so that you can't see the soil. Not super thick, but just if that's all you've got, sprinkling that on is a good thing to do. This is my COVID plot in the middle. I knew we weren't going to be able to do any work up there, and last year, not this winter, the winter before, it was also COVID. I just had so many weeds, it was demoralizing. So I bought a couple of bales of loosened hay, and this is a few weeks ago, and that loosened hay has been down the whole winter. And there's some peas coming up through that loosened hay. So if you don't have compost, I think loosen's a good option. It doesn't take very long to cover your garden with a bale of loosened hay because it breaks off in like biscuit chunks. Of course, you are bringing in products, and I try to think sustainably. How far has that product come to my garden? Lucerne is sourced in Victoria. The lucerne I'm buying. But things like sugarcane mulch. Now, I know there's no sugarcane grown in Victoria, so that's come a long way. So I think perhaps avoiding sugarcane mulch. But you can get pea straw, and that has probably come from a more local place as well. So when you're trying to cover your soil, it's good to think sustainably. The other thing, of course, is grow it with green stuff. And over the winter, I could have put a green manure down, but I chose lucerne instead. I will just add that this is how Tom and I have started all of our gardens. We've lived in all these rental properties, and within weeks, we've had a veggie patch up and running, just simply by putting newspaper down, even on a lawn, a patch of lawn, and then laying lucerne on the top and putting any compost material that we could find down. But there is one issue over winter, and that's slugs. So my answer to that is when it's like this and there's not much growing, I do use a little bit of that the iron pellets, and that knocks back the snails and slugs. And the other thing I do is I rake it back. I pull it away from the earth just briefly, so that I can pick the slugs out by hand, or just pulling it back and seeing what's under there. But what is under there there's so many worms. I asked my girlfriend to take a picture so I could show you. She didn't have her glasses on, so the only picture we got was the tail and the head of two worms. So I don't think I've included it, but under that mulch is just a huge quantity of big, fat, juicy worms. Composting my garden, putting their products around the garden. Planting a bit thickly, that's also good. So I don't always follow the exact distance between plants. So the silver beet and sprouting broccoli are probably a bit too close together, but it knocks back productivity a little bit, but it increases productivity in the same space. So I'm getting more silver beet in this. This is in my little 4x4 garden, by the way. I've had broccoli all winter, so much so that in the end we got a bit fed up with it, and I pulled a few out, which I'll show you later. And then herbs are great ground cover. I don't sow herbs in rows. They should grow in clumps, and they cover the soil and they keep the weeds down. So I don't dig. But I did think I'd show you a collection of spades. The one in the middle is my spade, but someone's used it for mixing concrete. So that shows
Somebody.
Yeah, my husband's here. It was him. That's a beautiful stainless steel spade. But what we do use them for is edges. So if we want to defend the front garden, we'll cut the edges at 45 degrees. But that saves a lot of work if you don't dig. But there's always a bit of give and take. On the left, on this picture over here, this is our collection. Well, we've got 4 mulch forks, so they are just as important to us as spades. So I would strongly suggest keep your eye open for a great mulch fork. The big one, I think, the yellow-handled one, is a coke fork, and that's fantastic when your mulch is a little bit dry. It allows you to pick it up. Moving mulch around is nowhere near as heavy labor as digging. And there's some really interesting videos online made about the American lady Ruth Stout, who started the whole idea of no dig. And she's 100 years old, and she's out in her veggie garden. She just rakes back a little bit of mulch and throws some seeds down, and she was just such a character. But she's passed away now, but she was gardening well into her 90s. So if you want to have a look at that, find that on YouTube, it's a lot of fun. She reckoned that she never did any work after 11 o'clock in the morning, and that was even after a good long Roman breakfast. And her reason for this was mulch. She said it allowed her to garden without work. She did write about 6 books though, so I think she was pretty busy.
Same thing.
So what do I also, these are my favorite tools. I know you've all got favorite tools, but this, because I do this like compost layer in my garden, these are just scratching tools. So the triangular one is great when the top's a little bit drier, and I just scratch off the weeds before they even have true leaves. They're just tiny, tiny weeds. If I let them get away, I use the hook on the other side, which is, I think it's called a gooseneck. But when we lived in southern Sudan, the farmers there, or well, I say farmers, every house grew a little field of sorghum, and that was all they used. They just scratched the top layer, and they raked that through to make a drill, and then they would drop in their seeds into the drill. There was no spades or shovels or digging. So scratching tools. This is an old talk of mine. I'm sure you all have used this system, but cut and come again. If you can plant a lettuce that you can take the leaves off, then that lettuce will be producing, 3 or 4 weeks after you've put it into the ground, and it will produce for a couple of months. Just like broccoli, I don't grow the single heads. I always grow this sprouting broccoli, and also spring onions. I don't. Well, I do pull my onions at different times, but I usually just trim them off until they're getting a little bit older, and then I'll start to pull a few up in patches, because if you leave those spring onions in the ground, they will produce full-sized white onions, about this big. So I classify those spring onions as cut and come again as well. So this is the kind of lettuce that I grow. These the frilly ones are really handy. So you pick the leaves from around the outside, and it starts to form a stalk, which, let me go back. So this is the cos on the right-hand side. So you start picking from the base, and you slowly pick your way up the stalk. Herbs, that pick and come again. Around my edges, I grow all this wild rocket, and I just chop it off. That's my favorite herb thyme. So in this kitchen garden, it's all stuff that I would use every day. Parsley, and then cut and come again peas. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I've planted on this right-hand frame here. These are pea shoots. You buy the telephone peas or the alderman peas, the ones that grow to 2 meters high. But as soon as they get their first little tendrils, you cut them off, and you've got this delicious little pea shoot. So that's, these peas will never need a trellis, because I just keep chopping and cutting them back. And the other thing that I will do is I look for gaps in the garden. Now, as I've said, all of those gaps are compost, so I'm not worried about my soil being exposed. But in that spot there, I can plant, I haven't decided yet, but I think I'm going to put one of my tomatoes right there in the middle of the garden. I like to have a tomato, a couple at home, so that if I need a quick lunch, I can run out and grab something. So that's really the succession planting idea. You should always be thinking, what would I need to grow next? And as I said, the greenhouse, I think it's quite a lot of work, but this is a pretty easy way. You probably do it too. So I threw seeds on the ground. This left-hand picture, this is 3 pictures. This left-hand picture is the seeds. I threw down Mizuna and lettuce. The Mizuna I already picked, but this is the lettuce that came up. And at about this stage, it's ready to be transplanted. So I started digging it up and then transplanting it around the garden. And the advantages of having a direct sown nursery bed is that those plants don't get any what's that term? They don't have to be acclimatized. They've been growing in the same place. So all I'm doing is giving them a little bit more space. So, you know, this plant became this plant in like 2 days, and I moved them all around the garden. And here they are. Like, they were over here on this side, and I transplanted them into a spot here. That's a few days later. That'll be my new cut and come again lettuces. I think I don't follow plans. I'm not a very good person in terms of written materials and plans, but I do use a planting guide. I think they're fantastic for helping you plan ahead. This one has a little column. This is the Northeast Melbourne Vegetable Planting Guide. This has a column and it tells you how to prepare for the next crop. So whether it's seeds or in a seed tray or, yeah. Can I have a time check, Tom, please? I should have my phone.
Yes, it is 11:32.
11:32. Right, I'm going to wrap up so that, because we're getting close to the end. So just a few more cut and comes again. This is a quick slide. Plants don't like to be alone, and especially things like onions. This is onions and leeks. So I always sow them in sets, and I always transplant them in sets. As they grow, they push away from each other, and they grow, you know, just as big as if you put one in, but they're much happier. And I do that for all sorts of things. Beetroots, I plant them in a group of about 5, all in the same spot. And the little beetroots come up, then they never get more than like tennis ball size. You're not going to get a beetroot this big, but I don't really want a beetroot this big. I like, you know, for me, the small ones are best. So think about your plants. Will it be happier if it's in a spot with more friends? And I did this a couple of years ago when we went to New Zealand, because we were going away in November, and I thought, well, how am I going to take care of my seedlings? So I thought, well, tomatoes, the volunteer tomatoes come up every year in the garden, so why am I worrying? So I put my tomato seeds down in a nice sheltered patch. This is my favorite Jean Flamme, and I like a lot of them. So those will come up like volunteers in the garden, and then I'll transplant them up to the plot. So you don't have to worry about a greenhouse. Things will come up in your garden. And then so this is Jean Flamme, and in these drills here, I've put my bullhorn capsicum because I want a lot of those as well. And I just don't have room in that little 5-shelf greenhouse. Now, the same lady that grows her veggie garden along the edge of our driveway, she also brought around a couple of tomatoes for me. And I said, well, where are you growing them? Have you got a big greenhouse? Because she has lots of seedlings. And she said, no, I just have them in the living room. Now, because we don't all want to grow seedlings in our living rooms, but she's got, like I have, a north-facing window, and you know, there's nothing wrong with having a few things growing in your living room. Obviously, call them indoor plants. But the other thing, of course, is it's great when you're part of a group like we are, and you can share your share seed